Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Stellium Astrology podcast. I have my notes in front of me, turning the page currently. I'm Stephanie James, your host. I'm the founder of stelliumastrology.com, and I'm also a tutor at the London School of Astrology, where I've taught various classes. Most notably, I created a 4-week course for the London School of Astrology in China. I think it's called the New Moon Astrology School, which was a really interesting deep dive into Lilith, Black Moon Lilith, Mean. I looked at Mean and I looked at True Lilith as well, so I did a bit of both. So yeah, I've been teaching for a while, lecturing, been to different countries to lecture, and I used to write horoscopes for Elle magazine as well. And if there's one thing I can do is I can talk about astrology a lot. I can just sit me down, let me waffle off about astrology, and I could be talking for a very long time, as I'm sure you've noticed if you listen to this podcast. My mum told me when she first listened to my podcast, she didn't realise she had her phone, the listening speed on like 1.5 or 2 times the speed, and she said she just didn't have the heart to tell me that I was talking too fast on my podcast, and then she realised that I wasn't talking too fast and it was her phone setting. And I was like, Mum, you really shouldn't be scared to tell me these things. I would have rather have known if you thought I was talking too fast. I really would rather know. Anyway, that's just a side note. Now, what we're talking about today is the Yod, which is also known as the finger of fate or the hand of God. Most commonly known as a Yod, really. It's not particularly. It's related. It's related to the quincunx aspect. So actually, the quincunx. We did talk about the quincunx in the minor aspects show. And it's definitely an aspect which is a bit more commonly one of the minor aspects which is more commonly interpreted in amongst the natal chart. Now, the Yod is an interesting one because plenty of us have planets that are quincunx each other, but when two planets sit at a 150 degree aspect to one planet in the chart, and happen to also be sitting at 60 degrees apart. So say you've got one planet sitting at the tip of this triangular configuration, which looks a bit like a Thor's hammer, but it's slightly skinnier. The planet sitting at the top, if it has two planets in different directions at a 150 degree angle, those two planets should be 60 degrees apart. And if those two planets are 60 degrees apart, that means that they are sextile each other. And we already know that the sextile is a coaxing aspect. It's a major aspect, but it's a soft aspect, it's considered. But it's a much more conscious and engaging aspect than perhaps a trine would be. So, whereas a trine can be almost a little bit like the thing that we don't even realise that, the gift we don't even realise we've got. The sextile is that kind of aspect which kind of asks us to push ourselves a little bit and explore different avenues, and offers us opportunities that, sometimes we might go, gosh, I wish I'd done that. I really do, actually, rather than just leaving it. So we also, when we talked about the quincunx, or it's also known as the inconjunct, we discussed, I think we talked about Dolly Parton's chart. She was an interesting one to talk about as far as a inconjunct or the quincunx is concerned. But actually, in addition to discussing Dolly Parton, it's worth noting that the quincunx is kind of like it's the blind spot. If you're driving down the road, I used to drive a little Toyota Aygo. And I would find that there was one bit, you turn your head round to look over your shoulder to check as far as you could out of the rear window. And there was just the design of the car. There was just a bit too much of a blockage. So you couldn't quite get the full view that you needed out of the rear. Not the rear view, so not out of the rear window, but just sort of like that kind of, that bit when you've got on the boot of the car, you've got an extra couple of windows that connect before you've got the window on the back seat. So yeah, I always found it quite hard to see out of that window, and it's quite important when you're driving to have full view, isn't it, really? And I always feel like that's a little bit what a quincunx feels like. It's something that, you know, actually I was on a course at the London School of Astrology. I was doing horary course, probably I think with Richard Swatton, and I've been at that location again a few times to study horary. I studied with Deb Holding as well, at the Traditional School of Astrology, which that class was held in the same classroom and the same building in very close to Russell Square in London. And the room that we were in, Frank Clifford came in, and like there was chairs set up. In this day and age of pandemics and things like that, there's absolutely no way that amount of people would have been allowed to be in that room together. But as we walked in, people were trying to move chairs around so that they were comfortably sitting, not too close to each other, you know, enough space to work. And Frank walked into the classroom and went, "Oh, this room feels like a quincunx." And I thought, yeah, it's like this kind of like, it's not comfortable, it's hard to move it around, it's difficult to sort of navigate, and like I've said, it's kind of like an on-off button. So when you've got these two quincunxes that meet at one point with one planet sitting at the top, you've got this kind of discomfort, this kind of uncomfortable planetary conversation going on, coming from two different parts of the chart with two different planets. Now, the two planets that are aspecting that apex planet are in a good communication with each other. They're talking to each other, and they're like offering each other opportunities, and they're quite harmoniously connected and comfortable to talk to each other. However, this planet sitting at the apex is in a very awkward conversation with them both. In fact, it's almost like they are trying to have a conversation, but they're not. It's it's a bit like me when two people talk to me at the same time. I find it hard to. I get a bit overwhelmed, and I'm like, oh, one at a time. I'm sure I'm not on my own with that. But, you know, you're just like, can one person speak, please? I can't do two people talking to me at the same time. And it's a little bit like that. It almost feels like this planetary conversation with these two planets having a good chat with each other, firing questions at this one planet sitting at the top of the yod, which is obviously the point of the yod where this energy kind of spews out as such. It actually it's quite an uncomfortable aspect. So Ray Orion in the Dummies book says it has a stop and go energy that creates false starts, backslides, uncertainties and frustrations. It demands continual adjustment and impairs your decision-making abilities, notably in the areas affected by the planet at the tip of the triangle. So the area that is the tip or the apex is the one that probably deals with the having to constantly adjust. You know, it might, like, you could almost relate it to, you know, a dysfunctional family where there's one person who has to try and keep both sides of the family happy. So even though, you know, they're related, these two planets at the bottom by sextile, so they're in a comfortable communication with each other, they're still vying for attention, and the person sitting at the tip of the apex is the person who has to try and not necessarily keep the peace, but they have to kind of, you know, manage this conflicting struggle between the planets, both needing attention and needing that conversation, but struggling to, you know, kind of come to their own kind of compromise at the bottom. There's constantly but what about me? But what about me? Having maybe two children that don't get on very well, and you have to kind of be the peacemaker. So Ray Orion also says this aspect sets up complex dynamics within a chart, but is it lethal? No. Is it a sign of a special favour from God? No. Do plenty of people have this aspect? Yes, they do. Try Leonardo da Vinci, Winston Churchill, Meryl Streep, Bonnie Raitt, Margaret Atwood, Amel Clooney and Barack Obama. Don't let the name of this aspect unhinge you. Good point, actually. Yeah, don't feel that it's like this foreboding, fated aspect. As we do know with the quincunx, as we discussed in the previous minor aspects show, the quincunx is given its reputation with disease as its relationship from the ascendant to the 6th house and the 8th house. Those houses, the 6th and the 8th, are both 150 degrees from the ascendant. So you can, and those, both the 6th and the 8th house, are related to health issues or dis-ease. It's not a comfortable aspect. It's not a comfortable way to sit. So, when you see a quincunx in the chart, like I've said before, it requires conscious engagement in order to kind of work with that energy. I have a couple of quincunxes. In fact, actually, if you included the angles, so if you included the ascendant, for example, in my chart, then my sun and my moon are both sextile and they're both quincunx my ascendant. So actually you could say I've got a yod, but I don't actually have a yod in that respect. And also with my nodes as well, I think my Venus placement and my Jupiter placement are, my Venus and Mercury and my Jupiter are sextile, and they would apex at my North Node in Cancer, but I also don't think that you really include the nodes either. So it's a sense of, it does have to be formulated with planets at each point. I wouldn't even go as far as including Lilith. Chiron I could, because it's an actual physical body in space flying around our solar system, and other asteroids I think would be okay to include, as long as they're not hypothetical points like nodes, Lilith, or like the angles which don't actually physically exist. It's man's way of dividing the sky and making sense of the different houses, the different sectors. So other people might disagree. Other people might say, well, no, I am going to include my ascendant in this. And I do have to say that I do think that there might be some sense of impact with including the aspect, including the angles. If you had a planet quincunx your midheaven, for example, it might be that, when it comes to career issues, you might struggle. It might be an all or nothing type of thing between that planet that's kind of vying for your attention somewhere down in the bottom of the chart, and also going out into the world and achieving what you truly want to achieve and expressing yourself in your professional public sense. For myself, I've always felt that my sun and moon had a good relationship. However, for example, I find that if I'm working, I'm fully into my work, and I struggle to. I'm either really, really good at keeping fit and having a good diet, and servicing my moon and what my moon needs, my nourishment, my needs and my requirements, versus my drive, my ambition, my direction in life, where I'm going. And I feel like the thing that's caught in the middle is my ascendant. So I'm kind of, I'm always aware that there's one thing that's not being addressed while the other is. So you could say that in some ways, having both of my sun and my moon quincunx my ascendant, I am aware that either one is on or the other is. And usually as a Capricorn sun, the issue is time for me. The issue is time. And, with the Scorpio moon, the issue is that I get obsessed with things. So I either have to fully immerse myself in one thing and, commit all of my time to that one thing or the other. It just feels a bit difficult to kind of do a little bit of both. It's something that I've really had to work on. So you could say that, if it feeds into the ascendant, or if it feeds into the MC, for example, that you may recognise that, but I don't think it's going to have the same expression as if I had a planet on my ascendant at those degrees, for example. So say I actually happen to have, moon or Mars on my ascendant, for example. If I had Mars on my ascendant feeding into my sun and moon by the Yod aspect pattern, I think it would be a much more, not volatile, but definitely a much harder thing to have to manage, and a much more obvious aspect pattern in my life. But yeah, there's definitely, like it says, a bit of a start-stop and a bit of a backslides and uncertainties, because, like I said, it's a little bit like the quincunx is a little bit like a light switch. It's either on or it's off. One side's working or the other side's working. It doesn't really seem to be both working well at the same time. It's not all switched on together. Not like a trine, for example, where, you know, it just feeds into each other. It's almost like having one of those chocolate fountains. I think I'm hungry. One of those lovely chocolate fountains that, you know, you go to, like they have them at weddings and parties and stuff, where you can like stick marshmallows or strawberries into them, and, you know, the chocolate just melts and it just gets pushed through the fountain and feeds through. It's constantly feeding. It's a bit more like one of those chocolate fountains that's broken, that's just like trying to pump lumps of chocolate through that just haven't melted. There's no flow. It's not really, it doesn't flow. That's really what it is. It's just kind of a broken chocolate fountain. Man, I really need to get some food. I think I need to sit down and have some lunch in a minute. But yeah, so it's an interesting one. And actually, what's really interesting about the quincunx is that, I think I mentioned this in the minor aspect show, you definitely notice them more as in synastry. They're actually quite a good aspect to have with somebody else, because there's a sense of an ability to be that missing link for somebody else. I think Harry and Meghan have quincunxes together. Not that they're everybody's favourite couple, Prince Harry and Meghan, Duchess of Sussex. But I know that with Princess Diana and Prince Charles, I think that their chart, they had quincunxes. They had yods that fed into each other's chart, which was a really interesting one. There's a book I need to recommend to you guys, actually, on the yods, if you're interested. And I know lots of people like to read about these things. And it's called, and I have got this book and I have read bits of it, but it's been a while, and I think it's in my bookshelf somewhere. The Yod book. And it says here, including a complete discussion of unaspected planets. The Kindle edition on Amazon is only £9.48. The paperback is £17.09. And the author is Karen Hanmacher-Zondag. And she's written a few books, I think. But yes, I've got the Yod book. Yeah, she's written loads and loads of books. If you go onto Amazon, you can have a look at you know, the author, and it links to all the other books that they've got, which is really interesting. I've got a couple of her books, actually. But yes, I think this is quite a psychological aspect, actually. And it can help you to connect with probably some more deeper underlying self-sabotaging behaviour patterns, perhaps. Might be an interesting one. So yeah, I did mention Princess Diana, but let's have a look who else has got one. Who else have I picked up here to have a look at? Oh, come on now, don't be annoying. Duke of Cambridge, William. It's interesting because the royals do tend to have a lot of difficult aspects in their chart. William does actually have a Yod. He's got Pluto, sextile Neptune, and he's got Neptune rising as well. His ascendant degree is at 27 Sagittarius, which is the galactic centre. So he's got his Pluto and Neptune sextile, which is a generational aspect for a lot of people born around 1982, 1983. Pluto and Neptune are very slow moving, and they were kind of tag teaming for a while, but they just happen to feed into his Venus placement, which is a personal planet, which means that and Venus and Chiron together as well. So that feeds into his personal planets, making it a very personalised experience for him. Now, you could argue that maybe the difficulty for William is that he is not free to marry who he wants, even though he's got this gorgeous wife. You know, I know that they always paint a picture in the media that they got together, they went to uni together, they've known each other for years, they were in a relationship for a long time, and then they broke up, and then they got back together again. And, you know, she's obviously going to be a fabulously supportive Capricorn, and a strong presence in his life. A friend of mine actually did the royal the royal synastry chart for their wedding, I think it was. I can't remember, was it their wedding? Yeah, so she got both of their birth times, which was really great because we didn't have Kate's birth time before. And she's got a Leo ascendant. Is it any surprise? Her beautiful mane, her hair is always kind of like that noticeable, gorgeous, long, thick brunette hair that she's got. But yeah, so they've got fiery ascendants that work well together. She's a Capricorn and he's a Cancer, so they've got that lovely planetary opposition balance that, you know, really is nice in a relationship. But actually, you know, it may, you know, I can't speak for him personally, because he is not somebody I know personally. However, I do know that the royals don't necessarily get to choose who they want to be with. And, you know, it's not a case of just going out into the world and finding someone and going, oh, I want to, you know, Harry's different. Harry is definitely different. He gets to choose who he wants to be with. And look how that's playing out currently. But, you know, with William, there's heavy expectations on him, heavy responsibility. He absolutely has to be, you know, seen to be doing what's best for the crown, and best for the country, basically. So, you know, I think that there may be a sense of, you know, his 10th house Pluto placement versus his first house or 12th house, really, but, you know, his Neptune rising on his ascendant. There's already this conversation between those two planets about, you know, professional responsibility, which is non-negotiable for William. That Neptune rising, which we already know that he had a mum who courted the media, and obviously there was a lot of issues with the paparazzi, and that's what led to her untimely death. So he's already got this uncomfortable kind of, well, the communication between Pluto and Neptune is in a comfortable aspect pattern with the sextile, and by the looks of it as well, his 4th house, if we're looking at equal house, his 4th house is ruled by Neptune as well. So this is home. He's got Neptune rising, so this brings into his personality, his persona, and then he's got that Pluto placement sitting in the 10th house, which also happens to rule his midheaven, which is at 2 Scorpio, and he has Jupiter up there as well, which is kind of reinforcing that Sagittarian Piscean message that we're getting. And it's all apexing at Venus, which is his value system. It's about 5th house matters because it's sitting in the 5th house, close to the 6th house cusp of kind of oppression and work and grind. It doesn't look particularly easy, and it isn't what he does. What he does is not, every aspect of his life is kind of a job. He has to be constantly on duty. He can't be overly emotional, and he's Cancerian. He's born on a new moon on the solstice, in Cancer. So, you know, he's a sensitive Cancerian boy with Scorpio midheaven, Jupiter on the midheaven as well, and that's feeding into his Sun-Moon conjunction by trine as well. So it's a nice communication between those planets, and it bodes well for him. And again, he's got this Sun-Moon conjunction sitting in his 7th house. So it's very much about duty and ambition, and also other people, relationships, you know, and he's got that Venus Chiron conjunction, which might, and in Taurus. So it's like a lack of being able to express your true feelings and what you really want to do. And maybe when he becomes king, which could, who knows when that's going to happen, because obviously the Queen is still going strong, and before William gets to the throne, his dad's going to be there first, which many astrologers are discussing the potential that this could happen when Pluto enters Aquarius, maybe, which I think is in 2020. Is it 2026? I can't remember now. But yeah, basically, it might be a bit sooner than that, actually. I've got my trusty ephemeris right next to me, so let's have a quick look at when Pluto moves into Pluto is going to move into Aquarius. What kind of accent was that? I don't even know. Yeah, I think it's moving in 2023. There you go. I was a bit generous. So yeah, 2023 when it moves in initially, but it will move back out again. But yeah, this could be a time for him when he ends up, not necessarily, but this could be a shift. The dynamic will shift. But yeah, Venus in the 5th house is children, and it's doing things that you love. And in conjunction with Chiron, there's definitely a kind of inflicted sense of not being able to really truly express yourself and what you want to do. Chiron in Taurus definitely can be a very low self-esteem kind of aspect. And Chiron in conjunction with Venus in Taurus also can be that. This could also be his relationship with Kate as well, and the fact that he's with her out of a sense of duty, but perhaps the real love, the true romantic aspect isn't particularly it's not his choice, it's not what he would truly want. Who knows, maybe he has affairs. I'm not saying he does, I don't know, I actually don't. Nobody, well, it'll come out if he ever is or does, because the British media are just relentless. But there could be this difficulty with relationships, because Pluto and Venus happen to also be in communication. Pluto, which is one corner of his yod, happens to be sitting in Libra, so that's relationship orientated Pluto. And Venus is also in Taurus, which is she's the ruler of Taurus as well. So Venus is really important in this yod. You often see with aspect patterns that there are certain things that relate to others. You notice little patterns and relationships between these planets. So it's really worth looking at and exploring. He also does have another quincunx as well between Uranus and his Sun. So again, it's like kind of there is a real sense of uncomfortable planets sitting at they're at dis-ease with each other, which creates a sense of inner conflict. And with this one, like I said, it's really kind of unconscious or subconscious. It's not consciously aware of the battle that it goes through regularly in order to be able to express itself in a flow, in the same way that maybe a trine would, or a kite maybe even. No, this one is definitely much more uncomfortable and unconscious, and it's either one or the other. So so hopefully you found that kind of interesting. So just a few other notes that I've written here, that the sextile stimulates the two quincunxes, and there's a subtle tension between between the planets, and the apex is the challenging point of expression. But yeah, it's about managing the switches. So it's almost like being a switchboard, that top planet, and having to manage both of those, like little noisy planets that are vying for attention, but not in such a hugely disruptive way. So that's it today about the yod. I hope you found it interesting. I'm sure you've probably got a quincunx or a yod in your chart, and if you do you relate to this? Have you recognised there are points in your life where you just seem to only be able to focus on one thing or the other? You can't seem to balance both of those things, so you're doing them both equally. I'd be really curious to know. Check out my YouTube channel, check out my Patreon page, and come and say hi on social media if you're enjoying, and don't forget to submit your chart if you'd like to be discussed. I know I have got a bit of a backlog of people that I need to cover, but yeah, this is definitely a different kind of year for me, so please hang in there, and I promise I'll get round to it, and when I do I will let you know. And if you're thinking of booking a reading with me, I would urge you to put your name down on the waiting list, because it's starting to get a bit of a backlog at the moment, so get in there early if you can do. Alright, you guys, take care, and I'll speak to you next time. Bye.